of a story with Swamiji which took place in 1973. I had been with Swamiji for less than a year, and he asked me, along with about 10 other devotees at Ananda Village, he asked me to go to Los Angeles with him for a visit. And first he asked if I could sing, and I think he established that at least I didn't have a painfully awful voice. And we went to Los Angeles ostensibly with the purpose of recording 2 albums of songs. And on these albums, Swamiji sung, and then the rest of us sung as a chorus. That these were all chants, all kirtan. One album was Yogananda Ji's songs, his chants, and the other album was in Sanskrit, and also Swamiji sung a couple of Bengali songs. And in those albums, it took us several days to record. A friend had a recording studio in Hollywood. And certainly the singing, the quality of singing was not the important thing. It was more the vibration, and I think Swamiji helping all of us to keep our vibration high, and keep it high over many, many hours of practicing, hours of singing. And on this trip also, Swamiji had several speaking engagements. And this is what I'm reminded of, is one of the places he spoke, and those of us with him went along with him to this lecture. It was in Topanga Canyon. It was a spiritual center, a yoga center. And in the hall, along the back wall, were photos of a number of famous gurus, famous modern spiritual teachers. And Swamiji gave his discourse, and then at a certain point during the discourse, I noticed a bit of commotion at the back of the hall. There were voices. And it was only at the end, after the discourse, I discovered what that was all about. And a young man came up to speak to Swamiji, and he had in his hand, he had a picture. And he showed it to Swamiji, and it was a picture of Satya Sai Baba, a photograph. It was sort of on card stock, on heavy paper. And he explained to Swamiji that during the discourse, Swamiji said the words, "When the disciple is ready, the guru appears." And this young man said that at the moment Swamiji said those words, that this picture on the wall behind him, the man was sitting right at the back wall, he said it fell down and landed right side up on his lap. And he said he had been praying for a guru, and he thought maybe it was Satya Sai Baba, but he just didn't know. And these kinds of things would happen around Swamiji. And yet, throughout his life, he refused to call himself a guru and resisted that title when people gave it to him. And he said this was a very deliberate move, that, part of the reason was his own guru was a self-realized avatar who had come into this world already realized with a world mission. And part of this line of avatars with world missions. And Swamiji didn't want people's attention to go to himself. He wanted to direct that towards Master, towards this line of avatars. And when someone would touch his feet, he would very often symbolically place his hand at the spiritual eye as if to say that he was offering this person's devotion up to Guruji, up to Yoganandaji. And Yoganandaji himself would do something similar, as if to offer this person's devotion up to God. He didn't accept it for himself personally, but he offered it to God so that this energy continued to flow. And Swamiji also talked about how the disciples of a great master, of an avatar, how the direct disciples are like facets of a diamond, that the guru is the diamond, the disciples are these different facets, and each disciple had a certain experience of the guru and can reflect that experience. But each one is just part of the whole reality of the guru. And he wanted to remind people, not to offer devotion to him personally, but to offer that devotion up to the larger source, up to Yoganandaji as the Satguru, the one who can bring us all the way to God. And in this way also, by using this example of facets of a diamond, it helps us to understand a great deal, that to be able to tune in to not just the Guru, Yoganandaji in this case, directly, but also to tune into his disciples, and also his disciples who are alive and with us today. That each one is a channel, is a representative in a particular way of the ray that the Guru has brought down to us, and that we can learn different lessons from each one, from the experiences of each disciple. I probably met maybe about 15 of the direct disciples of Yoganandaji, both here in India and also in America. And some of these disciples remained part of Yoganandaji's organization, which after his passing became more and more a formalized monastery, and very rigid and conservative in certain ways. And so these people were so sincere. At the same time, their expression, because of the organization, they couldn't express themselves in quite the same way, perhaps quite so freely. It wasn't their mission to do so, as someone who was not part of that organization. It's the nature of any spiritual organization to become more formalized, more hierarchical. One is reminded of the Ramakrishna mission, that the wonderful work that it's doing is a very formal organization, a monastery. And so unlike the personality, the character of Sri Ramakrishna, who was such a unique, free spirit and expression of God. And I'm reminded of a couple of those direct disciples, and I'm thinking of Hare Krishna Ghosh, who was the nephew of Yogananda ji, the son of his brother Sananda. And we met Hare Krishna on a number of occasions in Calcutta, and also Swamiji invited him twice to America, and I spent time with him there as well. I remember one story that he would tell, and all of these disciples, one thing they had in common was Guruji's sense of humor. And that was about all they had in common. Their personalities were each very distinct and very, very different. The very different facets of the diamond. Each of their experiences that they gained from the Guru was unique and different. And Hare Krishna told the story to us how when he was with Yogananda ji, Hare Krishna was just 15 years old. And for the year and a half that Guruji was in India, Hare Krishna was with him as much as he could in Calcutta. And he tells the story that in a big lecture hall in Calcutta, Guruji would have the whole audience press their hands together. And then in a pranam. And then he said, now separate your hands. And people couldn't bring their hands apart. And then he chanted Om. And then he said, now separate your hands. And they could separate their hands. And shortly after this, and Guruji would do these kinds of things to awaken people's interest. That if you show them some simple miracle, that could capture the attention of the worldly mind. And then sometime after this, in a smaller group, Guruji said to Hare Krishna, join your hands together. And Hare Krishna said he was afraid. He had no idea what was going to happen. And then Guruji said to Hare Krishna, now bring your hands apart. And Hare Krishna brought their hands apart. And people would ask Guruji, well, why didn't you make his hands stick together? And Guruji so sweetly said, he's my brother's son. How could I make his hands stick together? I'm reminded also of another direct disciple that we knew who lived for some time at Ananda village, right at the end of her life. And she knew Guruji, she and her mother, when she was a young teenager and young woman, in the 1930s and the 1940s. Her name was Kamala Silva. And Guruji encouraged her to marry another devotee, and for many years they had a meditation center in the San Francisco area. And she, as I said, she lived with us right at the end of her life, and she had dementia quite seriously, and she really did not recognize people who came to her from one visit to the next. She couldn't remember who was who, and forgot most of the things that one usually needs to remember to function in a day-to-day way. And yet she was never discouraged by this. She was just in this joyful state. And what she did remember very clearly was Yogananda ji and all of her experiences with him. And those were just crystal clear in her mind. And she lived in that joy all of the time. And you could see that in her. And it's sort of like what else is important? It's sort of like, even if we don't have a functioning mind, it's like it's more important where our heart is and where our inner focus is. And nothing can take that away. We carry that with us all of the time, lifetime through lifetime. Another disciple whom I met a couple of times, and her name was Peggy Dietz. And she lived with Yogananda ji in Los Angeles, and for some time she was a devotee there. She was also his chauffeur, and she would drive him wherever he needed to go. And one day they were out in the car, and he told her that she needed to teach Kriya, teach the Kriya Yoga technique. And she had no particular training. She wasn't a public speaker. She had the Kriya technique, but even then they sort of had official acharyas who, all of the other people giving Kriya, there were just a handful of them, they were all officially recognized acharyas. And she was rather taken aback because he said to her that you must teach this quite freely, and wherever you go, teach this to people who are ready for it. And she said, but what will the front office of the organization say, if I were to start doing that? And he said, now who are you following? Is it the front office or is it me? And so spontaneous was he in every situation, and very often sort of asking what seems like absurd things like this to this devotee. And yet, as she went through life, she was out on her own, living in different cities, and meeting many different people who were attracted to her and who were ready and eager to receive Kriya Yoga from her, and there was no logical way that they would receive it in any other way. This was, in some small way, this was her mission, not a small way, but not an official way, just from friend to friend, from person to person. And this is what the Guru asked her to do. Each disciple very unique, and for us too. We each have a role to play if we're attracted to Yogananda ji, if we're a devotee. He's opening the door for us, the door of new opportunities for us to be channels in this world, channels of light. And as I say, it need not be in any formal way, but just to hold in our hearts like Kamala Silva did, who held in her heart even when she didn't have her mind to work with. She had this feeling in her heart. And to be able to be, each one of us, be a channel in the world to share light, to share love, and to share the vibration of spirit, the vibration of Yoganandaji, of this path. But one needn't give it any label at all. Just be a channel to spread light wherever we go. And to know that everything else, those things that happen to us in life that may seem dramatic at the moment, they'll pass away. They're not the important things that stay with us. But the touch of a great teacher, the touch of spirit, the touch of divine love in our hearts, this is the important thing that we can carry with us, and that we can be a receptacle to offer this to all whom we meet.